Now tonight we're looking at turning the Dharma wheel, looking at the Buddha's first discourse, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and in particular focusing on the middle way, which is his introduction of what we now call Buddhism. So tonight we're going back to the very beginning of the whole thing. The Buddha is a young man, 35 years old, freshly awakened. These events take place on the full moon of Asalha, July, the lunar month, which corresponds roughly to July, 2 months after his awakening. The Buddha woke up under the Bodhi tree, Bodh Gaya, what is now Bodh Gaya, spent some time in the vicinity of the tree, and during this time he didn't make any attempt to convey to anybody what he had experienced or how the world now appeared to him. And the reason why he didn't was because he thought it would be too difficult, nobody would understand him. And eventually he was persuaded to teach by an old mate of his. When I say old mate, this is from innumerable eons ago, when in the time of a previous Buddha, both Gautama, who's now the Buddha, and this other person who's now Brahma Sahampati, a deva in one of the higher heavens, were practicing together with this previous Buddha. And one of them, when he died, ended up a major god, and the other one just kept going, chugging along the human and animal realm until eventually he became the next Buddha. So they knew each other from way back. And the Buddha, this Buddha, was after his awakening, was thinking of the possibility of teaching, but decided not to because he thought no one is going to understand what I'm talking about. This is too profound, it's too subtle, no one is going to get it. And Brahma Sahampati was listening in to his thoughts and was quite horrified by this conclusion and went down to earth and pleaded with him to teach, which the Buddha was persuaded. And the argument that persuaded him was that there are just a few people who have just a little bit of dust. If you teach them, they will understand, but if you don't, they will perish. So you've got to get out there and do something. So the Buddha was convinced and decided to start teaching. But it's interesting that the one thing the story shows is that the Buddha was pretty convinced at the beginning that this was not going to turn into a mass movement. He did not anticipate founding a world religion, and probably would have been very surprised to have found out what happened. His initial idea was just a few people might possibly get this, if he chose them wisely. And after some thinking about it, he decided on his 5 former companions. Now, before he became awakened, he went through, broadly speaking, 2 phases in his practice. First of all, he walks out of home, which was a place called Kapilya Vastu, which is essentially in southern Nepal, north of the Uttar Pradesh border, or around that area. And when he leaves, he goes southeast, probably following the major trading road, into what is now northern Bihar. And this is an area famous for yoga and meditation training. And he takes up with first one and then another major teacher. In both cases, he completes the training, both academic and meditational, graduates, is invited to become a teacher himself, and then says, "You call this Dharma? You've got to be kidding me." And he walks out. He's not satisfied. In other words, he has a history of walking out, basically. He walks out on his family, then he walks out on his first 2 teachers and their communities. He ends up on his own, but he gathers, or not so much gathers, but a group of 5 companions gather around him. Now, they're not disciples because he's not teaching. By this stage, he's just practicing on his own. But these characters are determined to stick around with him. So there's some tenuous connection between them. They don't form much of a community, but they're kind of in the same place. And at this point he's in his second phase, and he's practicing austerities. Now this is an ancient Indian tradition, tapas. We came across a similar word the other night when we talked about ardency, atapa, from heat. And tapas is the practice of generating heat, but in this context, the heat, the power that comes from austerities, from self-inflicted pain of one form or another. And you have a whole series of practices in this tradition. With the Buddha, his major one was self-starvation. In his later years, when he was reminiscing about the early days, he used to talk about how he could poke his finger into his belly and find his backbone. So he was pretty rigorous. He's quite fanatical. You can see this is a young man who is rather difficult to talk to. He knows what's best and that's it. They're quite macho, obviously, in his attitudes and approaches. And so he practices austerities and at some point realises that this is a dead end and gives up and starts to eat normally. And his companions are fed up because they think he's given up on the whole job and they walk off. Or alternatively, and this is unclear, he walks off. Perhaps this is another case of abandoning his prior community. Maybe they both walked off. Maybe it was mutually agreed upon divorce. In any event, they leave. And now, sometime later, unspecified time later, the Buddha has found the way to awakening, and he has in fact woken up, and he's now the Buddha. And he's looking for someone to teach, and his mind comes upon these 5 companions. And so he goes off to find them, and because of his psychic powers, which he now has because he's a Buddha, he knows where they are. They're staying at a place called Isipatana, about 15 miles, or 15 kilometres. Is it miles or kilometres? I forget. North of Varanasi, or Varanasi as it's known in the suttas. And the Buddha walks off to find them. On the way, he happens upon a guy called Upaka, and Upaka is an Ajivaka. This is one of the groups of samanas. Remember that in the Buddha's time you have samanas and brahmanas. The brahmanas are the hereditary Vedic priesthood. The samanas are this miscellaneous collection of everybody else, all the ratbags and yogis and philosophers and so on. And one of these groups of samanas were the Ajivikas, who also practiced asceticism and meditation. And when he meets Upaka, Upaka comes up, Upaka is interested, he comes up to him and says something like, your features are radiant, your complexion is clear. In other words, clearly you've got something, you're a quite remarkable looking character, clearly something's happened. So who is your teacher and what does he teach? And if a Buddha could be miffed, which I'm sure he couldn't be, but if he could be miffed, it seems that the Buddha was miffed, and he said, I don't have a teacher. I'm it, mate. I am the Buddha. And he launches into this spontaneous poem of praise of the Buddha, who happens to be himself. He's trying to get something across to Upaka. And what he's doing is plugging into a tradition which becomes very important in Buddhism, the power of truth. It's believed that truth has power. If you simply speak truth, then the speaking of this truth has power to change things, almost magical. You get different stories in the tradition in which it is magical. So you get this sense in the tradition of the power of truth. And so the Buddha simply speaks the truth in very poetic language. I'm it. I'm the supremely self-awakened one. I am the Buddha. I am the foremost in all the universe. I have no teacher. I have no one to rival me. So he lays it out. And Upaka kind of looks at him and says, could be translated roughly as, yeah, whatever. and he walks off, not impressed. So they head off in opposite directions, and the Buddha continues to Isipatana, perhaps reflecting on, it is going to be tough teaching. I mean, what to do? We can kind of guess that at this point he hasn't really figured out what he's going to say when he finally finds these companions. But he does track them down. On the full moon of Asalha Puja, they see him coming, And they're still really pissed off with him. And they decide, well, just ignore him. Just pretend he's not here. But like Upaka, they're struck by his appearance. There's something about him that they can't help themselves. And so they get up and they greet him and they make a seat for him and they sit him down. But they're still very resistant. They really don't like this guy. And the Buddha offers to teach them. He's learnt something from his encounter with Upaka. With Upaka, he made no offer. He just launches into this thing, this declaration. Now he's learned to be a bit more diplomatic. So he says, look, I can teach you now. You were chasing after me to teach you. And previously I wouldn't. Well, now I can. But he's lost his audience. And they say, we're not interested. Forget about it. And he offers again. No. And he makes the third offer. Now, as you know, the number 3 has symbolic significance. To do something 3 times, he's saying, I really, really mean this. And this time he adds something. He asks him a question. And he says, have you ever known me to speak like this before? Have I ever before declared that I was enlightened? And they said, no, you never have. And he says, well, I'm saying it now. And that persuades them to listen to him. Because although they really don't like him, still they respect him. And they know that he would never tell a lie. And so they're persuaded to at least listen to what he says. So now he's got an audience, and now he can start to say something. But the question is, what can he say? What can he say to convey something which is so profound and subtle that at first he thought nobody's ever going to understand this? And he's dealing with an audience who is hostile. Worse, they're just like he was. I mean, these are blokes, all of them. All of them actually older than him. He was the youngest. All of them complete fanatics, die-hard fanatics, pursuing this extreme path, not reasonable kind of blokes. And he might have reflected how, when he was practicing with them, if anybody had wandered in from outside and said, right, now I'm going to tell you the truth, and now I'm going to point out what you're doing wrong, what would his response would be? It's like, get out of here, don't waste my time. So now he's got to somehow persuade these characters. And not only that, they're still pissed off with him. So it's even harder. So what strategy can he hit upon to break through the resistance? And what he hits upon is what we call the middle way. So this is how the discourse begins. This is how I heard it. Once the Blessed One was living at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. There he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. They're called bhikkhus, but actually at this stage they are not. No one has been ordained. These are just ascetics. The Buddha says, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone out into homelessness. What 2? The pursuit of sensual happiness among sensual pleasures, which is inferior, normal, the way of ordinary people, lacking in refinement and useless, and the pursuit of the practice of self-exhaustion, which is painful, lacking in refinement, and useless. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way that gives rise to seeing and understanding, and leads to calming, direct knowledge, full awakening, nibbana. And what is the middle way that gives rise to seeing and understanding, and leads to calming, direct knowledge, full awakening, nibbana? This noble eightfold path, right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right energy, right mindfulness, and right unification. So this is the opening of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma. It's not the most moving and stimulating speech you've ever heard, but this is essentially the executive summary. This is what is memorised later to be handed down. This is not what he would have literally said at the time, but rather when people were getting together to memorise what was the points that he laid out, and to put it into a form that can be memorised, chanted and handed down. This is the version. So we have to unpack it to get a sense of what he's on about. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way. Tathagata is a term we've mentioned. This is a title of the Buddha that the Buddha gave to himself. He referred to himself as the Tathagata. Essentially, a Tathagata is someone who is just here, just completely boom, here. What he's awakened to is the middle way. And the middle way we can see as the strategy which the Buddha uses to convey his understanding. The middle way is variously expressed in the suttas. I think this is the only discourse where the middle way is presented as the middle way between the extremes of the pursuit of sensual happiness among sensual pleasures on the one hand and the practice of self-exhaustion on the other. There are more famous, more well-known middle ways that are often mentioned. The middle way between existence and non-existence is one. The middle way between eternalism and annihilationism is another. This one, between the pursuit of sense pleasures and self-exhaustion, is unique to this particular discourse. He doesn't mention it again, as far as we know. The middle way is essentially a way of presenting dependent arising, paticca samuppada. It's a way of presenting a general principle, and he's applying it to a specific situation, the situation right in front of him. He is aiming this at these 5 companions and their situation. The important thing here is the context. One of the reasons why the Buddha is regarded as a great teacher is because he became acutely aware of the importance of context. You can say the right thing in the wrong context and it doesn't work. You've got to pitch what you say according to the context. And this is illustrated in the way that the discourses begin. They always begin this way. First of all, this is how I heard it. So it's an oral tradition. This is the way it was chanted, and this is the way I heard it. In this particular discourse, once upon a time, so you set the time. The Blessed One was living at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. You set the place. There he addressed the group of 5. You set the situation. Time, place, event. You add those together and you get a specific context. And out of that context arises this specific teaching. So sometimes it will be at one time when the Buddha would be wandering in a certain country, he would meet a certain person and such would happen, and then the Buddha says, ... The teaching is always specific to the situation, but it's conveying a general principle that is simply being adapted to different situations. And this is what he's doing here. The context here is he's got to penetrate the defences of his audience. Now this is something that he has to do with every audience, not just these characters. He's teaching Dharma. He's teaching the truth. And we resist Dharma fiercely. We resist hearing the truth. We don't want to hear it. Most human beings, we have no interest whatsoever in wanting to actually know what's going on. We prefer fairy tales, comforting fairy tales. This is something that the mass media well know. If you're going to make money out of a news organisation, you heavily package the news and you feed people what they want. Now, people like to go to horror movies, and people like a bit of violence on their news programs. Not too much, just a little flash, just to get them excited. And, they like human interest stories, to soften it at the end, leave you with a good vibe. Maybe a little smile and a joke. Yes, everything's heavily packaged because we don't like the plain, simple truth. We have layers of defence against it. Now, the Buddha knows this from his own experience. What turned him away from normal life? When he was a young man, it was said that he had this realisation of the universality of ageing, sickness and death. Everybody who is born gets old, gets sick and dies, which you would think is kind of bleeding obvious. But when he realised it, it really shocked him to the core. And whatever it was, but for some reason, at some point, his defences were down. And the fact of the universality of what he came to call dukkha, which we could translate as pain, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, the universality of it, the inescapability of it, the all-pervasiveness of it. One day it hit him in a way that it never hit him before. And it penetrated all those normal human defences. And it was that understanding that propelled him out of his home and into the forest. Now, everybody knows that we who are born will age, sicken and die. We all know that. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone in this room. But we don't let it get to us. And although we know it, in inverted commas, we act as if we don't. So we act as if we're never going to die. We just pretend it's not really happening. And again, the society colludes in this fantasy that we all pretend that death doesn't really happen to us. It happens to some people. People who get locked away in nursing homes where fortunately we don't have to see them. Apparently it happens to them. I don't really know, but I've heard it happens to them. But there's something good on TV, so I'll just turn the TV on. We don't let this penetrate our defences because it's too shocking. We have this defence mechanism set up. And if the Buddha is to teach the Dharma, he's got to work out a way through those layers of armour. And in this particular case, through these guys, layers of armour, these particular people. He's got to find a way through the defences and reveal the problem. But he's got to do more than that. He's got to show them a way out of the problem. It's not enough to simply to know that human life is inherently bound up with suffering. What we need to also know is there is a way out of our dilemma. There is something we can do about it. So this is what he has to do. Now, these particular people in his audience were practices of extreme asceticism. Now, the basic theory behind asceticism is that if you want to attain sukha, which is bliss, happiness, fulfillment, etc., the way to do it is via dukkha, pain. So if you can master yourself, if you can go through pain and hit the bliss at the other side, this will create some kind of mastery, some kind of understanding. And if you do it enough, whammo, you'd be awakened. It's a very macho approach. This ascetic path begins with a fundamental insight, a fundamental understanding, which we could express in contemporary language as the understanding that consumerism does not work. The normal human strategy for attaining happiness is to get more, to become more, to produce more. This belief comes up in our society as if only we increase the standard of living enough, then we'll all be happy. But this is the purpose. This is why we're here. Certainly this is why governments are here. We elect our politicians so that they can grow the economy. That's their basic job. And if they don't do it, we've got to chuck them out and bring in people who can. So the economists are the high priests of our society. We're locked into this whole pattern. Consume more, get more. Look, you've had it for 5 minutes. There's a later model. Chuck it out, get another one. Then you'll be happy. Your car's a bit old. And besides, the technology has improved now. So get a better one. Then you'll be happy. And this is the ideology that we are bombarded with through the advertising industry. It's this relentless sense input. In fact, this society that we live in, probably at no point in human history have human beings lived with such a massive input of sense data just being shoved at them. And most of it is about buy. And the underlying belief system is get this and then your life will be worth living. But if you don't have it, you're a loser. The 5 companions have seen through that illusion. They know that's rubbish. They also know that most people have bought into it. But they can see clearly it was complete rubbish. It doesn't work at all. Which makes them already a very small cultural minority. They've had a genuine insight. This does not work, it cannot work. It's utterly futile. With this insight, they're immediately catapulted out of normal human society. They just don't fit. And it takes a certain stubbornness to hold to this and to pursue an alternative path. So, these guys are they're tough, they're stubborn. So, consumerism doesn't work. So what should we do? Okay, this is the problem. So let's think about it. That way doesn't work. It's a complete dead end, total blind alley. What would be the right way? Got it. The opposite direction. That would work. If I want to go the right way must be opposite to the wrong way. If the wrong way is consumerism, is trying to have more, get more, the right way must be to get rid of everything. If the wrong way is trying to satisfy every sense desire, the right way must be to deny every sense desire and to transcend that somehow, to go through the pain that I'm hiding from and to somehow transcend it. And then you get that stubborn, extreme, macho attitude piled onto it. And so let's just generate a bit extra pain here, boys. Let's see who can endure the most. And let's get together in a kind of team where we're competing to see who can flog each other the most. This is the audience. This is what they believe in. And remember that to follow this path, you have to be particularly stubborn and determined. Otherwise you would never even begin it, much less survive for any period of time. What the Buddha is doing with the middle way is he's pointing out the wrongness of their path. They think it's right because it's the exact opposite of the wrong path. What the Buddha is saying is it's wrong precisely because it's the opposite of the wrong path. The opposite of the wrong path is another wrong path. The first wrong path, consumerism, is what he calls an anta, which gets translated as extreme. An anta is a peak, like a mountain peak is the anta of a mountain. You can't go any further than this. So in another context, it's an extreme. If you pursue one thing to the end, it's an extreme. So that didn't work. I'll try the opposite. But the Buddha is saying, you think that should work because it's the opposite, but it won't work precisely because it's the opposite. And because it's the opposite, it's just another anta. It's a different one. It's the shadow of the first. The ascetics look at most people and they say they are driven by desire, by greed. And they're just hopelessly up a blind alley. So we're going to go the opposite direction. And the Buddha is pointing out, if you head in the opposite direction, you're not being driven by greed, but you're being driven by aversion, which is the opposite of greed. And that too is a dead end. And it's a dead end because it's the opposite. These are two extremes. When the Buddha, in the Buddha's teaching, he talks a lot about desire, but he develops a fresh understanding of desire. Desire for the ascetics is all about I want, grab. But when the Buddha talks about desire, he always talks about it in terms of both that, and its shadow, which is, if I want that, I don't want this. Aversion is the shadow of desire, and desire is the shadow of aversion. Both of them lead to dead ends, and we find ourselves lurching from one to the other, and it doesn't quite work. The middle way is an alternative to the pairs of opposites. So let's give an example that we all know about, which is, in terms of the meditation practice, the problem of effort, which is a major problem for meditators. So we might be seduced into coming to a meditation retreat because we've heard about relaxation, and we've seen the pictures of Bodhi tree, there's nice trees, and so we think, I can come here and relax. And then get a rude shock when we arrive and discover there's anything but relaxing. Meditation is hard work. It takes a lot of effort to do it, much less to maintain it, to keep it going, to get a momentum going. So we have the problem of effort. We work hard on our meditation, and we have a certain structure, we sit for 45 minutes, then the bell goes. We can stop. What a relief. I've been working hard for 45 minutes. I deserve a break. Aren't they unreasonable in not letting us just hang out in the veranda and have nice cups of tea all day? I deserve it after this 45 minutes of hard work. I deserve a bit of a break. I just relax for a while. But why do I want to relax? It's because this effort involves a strain. It's working, work, strain. I've got to do something about this. Okay, straining isn't satisfactory. What to do? Take a break, relax. That's what I'll do. And so I relax for a while. But then I realise it's really boring here after a while. I mean, there's not exactly lots of entertainment. So I better go back into the hall and get back to work. So work. God, that's hard. Enough. Take a break. Relax. Strain. Relax. Strain. Relax. Now this is describing it at a pretty extreme level, but it's also much more subtle. But the same pattern we have again and again. Push, because I want to get something. It's too much. Drop it. Drop the ball. Relax. Oh, God, this is not working. Strain, relax. Strain, relax. When we make the decision to switch to the opposite, it seems the right decision at the time, precisely because it's the opposite. If straining is a problem, surely relaxation is the answer. If relaxing is the problem, surely effort is the answer. It's obvious, isn't it? And what the Buddha is saying is, no, neither of them work. Because they're both extremes. So he talks about, in this context, he will talk about right effort. And where do we find right effort? We don't find it here with the relaxation, and we don't find it here with the straining. We find it somewhere in the middle. This is the middle way. When we do this, when we lurch from... What is the middle way? Sometimes the middle way is conveyed as moderation, which I think basically gets it completely wrong. Let's say one end of this mat is one extreme, and the other end of the mat is the other extreme. Where do we find the middle way? How can we find it? Simple, we get a tape and we measure, and exactly halfway we mark that. Middle way. Moderation. It's pretty unlikely. First of all, the Buddha, he was awakened, but moderate? I don't think so. I mean, look at the way that he lived. Even after he became awakened. 3 robes, a bowl, happy to camp out under a tree all night, 1 meal a day. This is moderation. If this is moderation, I'd hate to see extremism. It doesn't strike me as being particularly moderate. Now, he was pretty full on all his life. And when you think about it, isn't the exact middle, just another extreme? Oh, I can't have the end. That's wrong. What's the opposite of the end? The middle. I'll go straight for the centre. That must be right. But actually, it's just another extreme. It's just bouncing from one extreme to the other. Where do we find the middle way? The middle way can only be found where there is no anta, where there are no extremes. In other words, where we are not stuck on anything, where we are not stuck anywhere. The middle way is found as a dynamic balance between the opposites. It's a place which is characterised by no fixed position. As soon as we land anywhere and fix a position, we've just got an extreme. It's here, which is the opposite of there. It's right, which is the opposite of wrong. It's Buddhist, which is the opposite of not Buddhist, etc. As soon as we land somewhere and hold on to it, we've just hit an anta, an extreme, a limit, and we've missed the middle way. So the middle way is impossible to pin down. The one thing we can be sure about it is that we can only find it in the present. If you look again at the problem of effort, the problem of effort is very much bound up with the problem of time. Right now, I am meditating. Why? Well, because I want something, obviously. Have I got it yet? Well, no. So what I have to do is strive in order to push through what's happening now to get to what I want to be happening, which will happen sometime in the future. So whatever it is that I'm chasing after, there's one thing I can be sure of: it's not what's happening now. I have to somehow push through what's happening now to get to where things really start to happen, which will be later on. Except that it's always going to happen later on, so I never quite get there. But we cannot find the middle way in the future. The middle way is not something which is going to happen. Something which is going to happen is an anta, it's an extreme. It's the opposite of the past. Or perhaps it's the opposite of the present. Perhaps past and present are both opposites. Past and future are both opposites of the present. But in any event, it's got this swinging from one side to the other quality that the extremes have. The middle way, if we're going to find it, can only be found in the present. But in the extended present that we've been talking about in the context of mindfulness. So if there's any holding to the past or striving for the future, we can be pretty sure it ain't the middle way. I'm striving to get something that I haven't got. Alternatively, I'm trying to get back to my meditation as it was before. If you ever had the experience where you're meditating away and you're distracted, and you suddenly realise you're distracted, and you think, well, my job now is to get back to my meditation object. Have you ever done that? So what are you trying to get to? What you're trying to get to is the past, before things went belly up. But we can't get back to the past. It's impossible. We can no more get back to the past than we can get forward to the future. And both of these are extremes. The middle way is found now. It's found here, or it's not found at all. The middle way has this characteristic of dynamic balance, of no fixed position. And so when the Buddha gives his first definition of it, he says, what is the middle way? that gives rise to seeing and understanding and leads to calming, direct knowledge, full awakening, nibbana. This noble eightfold path, right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right energy, right mindfulness, and right unification. The metaphor that he gives is the path, but you notice it's complex. From the very beginning, it's complex. There are 8 factors in it. It's a complex system made up of 8 aspects. But this is a system made up of 3 subsystems, because in other discourses it will be divided into the 3 trainings of Sila, Samadhi and Panya. It actually begins with Panya, wisdom, right view, right aspiration. But do you notice it's already complex? It's already made up of 2 parts. Then you get the right speech, action and livelihood. This is ethics, Sila. But again, it's made up of parts. It's dynamic. There's a threefold balance involved here. And then you get meditation, which is made up of another 3 parts, right energy, right mindfulness, right unification, or concentration. Now that's a dynamic balance. We've been talking about this because we're focusing on meditation. We've been talking about this one a lot. And the most obvious one is we've been talking about how the balance between effort, energy on the one hand, and samadhi on the other. Samadhi is unification, concentration. Now, if you look at these 2, effort, energy, is the do aspect of meditation. I have to do something. I've got to send awareness to my meditation object, and I've got to do it right now. And then I've got to do it right now, and I've got to do it now, and I've got to do it now, and I've got to do it now. So this is the energy, the work aspect, the relentless quality of it. I have to do it now. The fact that I did it 10,000 times before in the past is completely irrelevant. I've got to do it now. Then there's samadhi. Samadhi doesn't do anything. Effort, energy is active. Samadhi is receptive, peaceful. It's not doing anything at all. If anything, it's receiving. It's completely different. And these 2 need to be in balance. If there's too much effort relative to unification, I can have a very clear, focused mind, but it's tight, restless, and I can't maintain it. Or if I do maintain it, I just blow up. I just go completely crazy. I can have too much samadhi, unification, concentration, relative to energy. The mind is very peaceful, still, but dull, not really with it. We're constantly trying to balance these 2. And the balancing factor is mindfulness. So mindfulness there's an active quality to it, but there's also a receptive quality. There's an active quality, I'm reminding myself I am already aware. I'm reminding myself to be aware. But it's got a receptive quality to it as well. It doesn't matter what I'm aware of. Mindfulness will receive anything at all. So it's got both. And it balances the other 2. And so it brings this little subsystem into balance. But this little subsystem has to be in balance with the one over here, which is the wisdom, right view, right aspiration. These 2 have to be in balance. And then they can balance this one. But then there's this one in the middle, which is 3, and they have to be in balance. And when they're in balance, then they can balance the other 2. And the other 2 can balance it, and so on. So you've got all of these interrelationships happening between the 8 factors. And at any point, if any one of them is out of whack, the whole system is out of whack. It's a constant dancing to find the balance. It's kind of Dharma surfing. Not that I've surfed, but... And any fixed position, any fanatical holding on to one thing is pretty much guaranteed to upset the balance. This is, of course, is precisely what the ascetics were doing. They were holding ferociously to a single fixed position. And so, although they were, well, as the Buddha himself pointed out, when he was reminiscing about his days as an ascetic, he said he developed unremitting mindfulness. Just ceaseless mindfulness and strong concentration with such effort that he said sweat poured from his armpits. with the effort. Now, what I need to ask you is, have you ever made so much effort in your meditation practice that sweat has poured from your armpits? This is a fixed, fanatical holding on to one thing with huge determination. And so you can develop some interesting meditational states out of it. But it's hopelessly out of balance. The middle way has this inherently dynamic quality of the complete absence of any fixed position. It's constantly moving. It's constantly adapting. It doesn't stay still. One of the implications for this is it's never under our control, which is one of the reasons why we resist it. If we practice meditation long enough, we realise we don't know how to meditate. We realise when we sit down that we don't know what's going to happen next. And it always comes as a surprise. Sometimes it's a pleasant surprise, sometimes it's an unpleasant surprise. But we know that we're not in charge. When we start, we strive to become in charge. We think that's the job. And eventually we realise, actually, we can't. We can get some interesting experiences if we're in charge. But it's a dead end. It's just another another extreme. This is the teaching of the middle way, which is the fundamental principle that guides the whole enterprise. And where it relates to our situation is to recognise the inherent dynamism of what we are doing. We cannot pin it down. What we're constantly doing is bringing it back into balance to get a sense of what balance feels like, and then recognising when we fall out of it. This is not it. So I've got to make some kind of adjustment to bring it back into balance. Okay, this is it. Whoops, I just lost it again. Okay, so what do? I do this. Yeah, it's coming back. Okay, now I've got it. Whoops. It has this fluid, dynamic quality to it all of the time, which you can look at and think this is incredibly frustrating. But on the other hand, you could look at it and think this is fun. You've really got to play with it in order to get a sense of it. But it can only be found now. It cannot be postponed. It's not that if I slog today, then sometime tomorrow I might find the middle way. That doesn't work. It's to be found now. This balance is to be discovered right now in this situation. So it's very intimate as well. So this is the way the Buddha broke through the resistance of his first audience. This was what opened up their minds to what he was saying. And tomorrow we'll continue with the first discourse, and we'll look at the next part of the teaching, which are the four truths, in which he, having established the basic principle, which opens up the five ascetics, they realise, we've got it wrong, haven't we? Then he teaches the four truths, and we'll do those. We'll have a look at those tomorrow night.